June 10th, 2021. Twitter users in Indonesia, now rebranded as X, were abuzz with a thread posted by an account featuring a man named Rizki. Rizki, who typically shared snapshots of his normal and cheerful life, decided to open up about the supernatural disturbances he had experienced since first becoming a university student 3 years earlier in 2018. What made Rizki's thread go viral wasn't just the uniqueness and eeriness of his story, but also the fact that he provided evidence to support his claims. Here is the account of Rizki's supernatural experiences. Rizki was just another college freshman, eager to start a new chapter in his life. The year was 2017, and he had recently been accepted into a prestigious university in Yogyakarta. Like many other students, finding a place to stay near campus was his first priority. The flat he initially wanted was full of life, laughter, conversations, and the hum of young energy, but it was fully booked. Disheartened but determined, Rizki settled for a quieter flat nearby. It wasn't far from the bustling neighborhood he had envisioned, but it lacked the same warmth. At first glance, it seemed perfect. Clean, surrounded by greenery, and affordable. The landlady was kind, and the other tenants kept to themselves. What Rizki didn't know was that this quiet, unassuming flat would be the stage for a 4-year nightmare he would never forget. The first night was when it began. Rizki's mother had accompanied him to move in, helping to set up his modest room. She left that evening, wishing him luck with a tight hug and reassuring smile. Alone for the first time, Rizki sat on his bed, scrolling through his phone to distract himself from the unfamiliar quiet. The flat, though neat, felt suffocatingly still. Every sound, whether it was the creak of the walls or the rustle of leaves outside, seemed amplified in the silence. As the night deepened, Rizki ventured out onto the balcony of his second-floor room. Across the hall, he could see another room, its door slightly ajar. Earlier that day, the door had been shut, or so Rizki thought. The hallway was dimly lit, the weak bulb casting long shadows on the walls. He peered into the darkened room, his eyes struggling to adjust. Then he saw it, a gaunt figure stepping out of the shadows. The man, if you could call him that, was impossibly thin, his ribcage jutting out beneath sickly pale skin. His eyes were hollow, his movements slow and deliberate. Rizki froze, his breath caught in his chest. The figure lingered for a moment, its head tilted as though observing him, before retreating into the darkness. Terrified, Rizki stumbled back into his room, slamming the door shut. He sat on the bed, heart racing, struggling to process what he'd seen. He rationalized it as the spirit's way of introducing itself, perhaps a macabre welcome from the unseen inhabitants of the flat. The next 6 months were marked by escalating strangeness. One of the more disturbing incidents occurred late at night, when Rizki noticed a man standing in front of his friend Teza's door. The man's posture was odd. His forehead was pressed flat against the door, as if he were listening intently to the emptiness beyond. Rizki called out to tell him that Teza wasn't home, but the man didn't respond or move. Shrugging off the eerie silence, Rizki returned to his own room, leaving both his door and window open for ventilation. Minutes later, Rizki glanced toward the staircase and froze. The man was standing there, unmoving, his forehead tilted slightly, as though he were still watching Rizki from the shadows. There was something deeply unsettling about the way he stood, his posture stiff and unnatural, his gaze unblinking. The intensity of his stare sent an involuntary shiver through Rizki's spine, and he quickly averted his eyes. Wanting to warn Teza about the odd behavior, Rizki grabbed his phone and sent him a WhatsApp message, explaining what he was seeing. To Rizki's surprise, Teza replied almost immediately, his message accompanied by a selfie. In the photo, Teza was smiling in what looked like a cafe, seated beside another man, a man whose face Rizki instantly recognized. It was the same man who had been standing in front of Teza's door, pressing his forehead to it, and the same man who now stood on the staircase, watching Rizki. For a moment, Rizki's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. His stomach dropped as he double-checked the photo. There was no mistaking it. The man in the photo was wearing the same clothes, had the same sharp features, and carried the same unnervingly vacant expression that Rizki had just seen in real life. "That's impossible," Rizki whispered to himself, his pulse racing. How could the man be with Teza, far from the flat, and at the same time standing just feet away? Summoning the courage to confirm what he feared, Rizki turned his eyes back toward the staircase, but the man was gone. The space was empty now, eerily silent, as if nothing had been there at all. Rizki's hands shook as he typed a reply to Teza, asking for reassurance. Teza, still oblivious to Rizki's mounting panic, responded casually, joking that the two of them were enjoying snacks and didn't have any plans to return soon. One particularly unsettling night, after Rizki had been studying late for his exams, he lay in bed trying to unwind when the quiet of his room was shattered by the sudden rattling of his door handle. At first, he thought it might be one of his friends playing a prank, but the movement of the handle was anything but casual. It was violent, erratic, and deliberate, as if someone or something was desperately trying to force their way in. Heart-pounding, Rizki sat frozen for a moment, staring at the door. The sound of the metal clanging against the door frame grew louder, the handle twisting and jerking with unnatural force. He mustered his courage and crept toward the window next to the door, carefully peering through the small gap to see who might be outside. The hallway was empty, bathed in the faint glow of a single dim bulb. There was no one there. The door handle, however, continued to rattle. From his vantage point at the window, Rizki could clearly see the handle moving up and down as if manipulated by invisible hands. Whatever was causing the disturbance was not human. The next day, Rizki tried to explain the incident to his friends, hoping for reassurance or understanding. Instead, they laughed it off, dismissing his story as an overactive imagination fueled by exhaustion. Some teased him, joking that the flat had introduced itself again. Frustrated and feeling isolated, Rizki decided that he couldn't keep explaining these experiences without proof. That night, he made a decision. He would start documenting everything. From then on, Rizki kept his phone charged and within arm's reach at all times, ready to capture evidence of the strange occurrences that had become a regular part of his life. Though he didn't know it yet, this decision would mark the beginning of even greater disturbances, as though the act of recording them only provoked the unseen forces further. The first video he recorded was of the same door handle being shaken one night after his exams had ended. He set up his phone, determined to capture proof of what he was experiencing. Sure enough, the handle rattled violently, but when Rizki threw the door open, the hallway was empty. This video became the foundation of his growing collection of evidence, though it did little to ease his fear.
Woi, siapa tuh? Halo?
After he began recording the disturbances, the activity in the flat grew more frequent and intense. One night, as Rizki was asleep, he was startled awake by the sound of the bathroom door handle shaking. His heart pounded as he realized his bedroom door was locked, meaning no one could have entered his room. Gripping his phone, he started recording and crept toward the bathroom. As soon as he opened the door, the shaking stopped, and the room was empty. Rizki's hands trembled as he reviewed the footage. Even with no logical explanation, it was proof that whatever haunted the flat was becoming bolder. The flat's malevolent presence wasn't confined to its residents. One night, Rizki ordered food through GoFood, a popular Indonesian food delivery service where customers can order meals online. The delivery driver called Rizki upon arriving at the flat, explaining that he'd left the food hanging on the gate and was leaving immediately. Rizki was puzzled, especially since he'd chosen to pay in cash. After retrieving the food, Rizki received another message from the driver, who asked him to transfer the payment instead. The driver admitted that as he waited by the gate, he had seen a kuntilanak, a long-haired female ghost in a white dress, sitting on the second-floor balcony, laughing and staring directly at him. Rizki's stomach churned as he looked up at the balcony, now dark and empty. The hauntings didn't stop. On another occasion, Rizki decided to check on his friend who lived in a room across the hall. Seeing the room was dark, Rizki snapped a photo to send to his friend via WhatsApp, asking if he was inside. As he looked at the photo again, his blood ran cold. There was a small dark figure peeking out from the corner of the wall. When Rizki rushed out to investigate, the figure darted out of sight, disappearing into the shadows. Sightings and anomalies occur one after another, shaping Rizki's daily life. Then, one fateful day, it becomes more than just a sighting. A truly peculiar phenomenon awaits him. It was a clear day, just like any other ordinary day. Rizki had made plans with his friend Siki to meet at his flat before heading out to work on a group project elsewhere. The plan was simple. Siki would come by, pick him up, and they'd leave together. But just as Siki arrived, Rizki felt the sudden urge to use the bathroom. He told Siki to let himself in while he quickly stepped away. Minutes later, Siki entered Rizki's room, only to find it empty. His bag was there, his laptop was open on the desk, but Rizki was nowhere in sight. Puzzled, Siki walked toward the bathroom, knocking lightly on the door before opening it. As the door swung open, Siki peered inside. To his surprise, the bathroom was empty. But Rizki, seated on the toilet, saw everything. He watched as Siki stood in the doorway, looking directly into the small bathroom, his face marked by confusion. What struck Rizki as strange was his own reaction. He wasn't startled by the intrusion or even embarrassed. Instead, he remained eerily calm, as if frozen in place, quietly observing Siki's actions. It felt surreal, almost dreamlike. Siki, clearly unsettled, muttered something under his breath and shut the door. He returned to Rizki's room, assuming he had somehow missed him or that Rizki might have stepped out without saying anything. Siki sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone while waiting. Moments later, Rizki emerged from the bathroom, wiping his hands on a towel and greeting Siki casually. Siki's reaction was immediate and visceral. He leapt to his feet, his face pale as though he had just seen a ghost. "What? Where were you?" he stammered, his voice shaky. Rizki frowned. "I was in the bathroom. You even opened the door and looked at me." Siki's eyes widened. "No, you weren't. I opened the door, Rizki. I swear there was no one there." The room fell silent as the weight of Siki's words sank in. Rizki tried to brush it off with a laugh, but his friend's expression was deadly serious. For the rest of the day, Siki remained visibly shaken, frequently glancing over at Rizki as though unsure if he was really there. Meanwhile, Rizki couldn't shake the unnerving feeling that something truly unexplainable had happened. It was as though, for those brief moments, he had been erased from reality, or displaced into a space Siki couldn't perceive. However, what Rizki did not realize was that the very strange incident marked the point where the mystical disturbances became increasingly intense in the days that followed. That incident, for whatever reason, seems to provoke them.